hardly know where to begin to introduce this gentleman. When I first met him, my kids and I were there, and we were enthralled just listening to his stories. And he has been through a lot. He has been through a lot, folks. And we read about history, we watch it on TV, but this gentleman lived it. He lived it, and you're going to hear about it. Let me give you a kind of an overview of what he's been through first, and then we're going to dive into some details, okay? And he did say he would open up for some questions at the end, too. So we'll do that as well. But this is Lieutenant Dr. James Fall, and he was a dentist here in town. He's been in Marion for over 70 years. He opened his practice in 1950, and he's never, you would never know that he's been through what he's been through. He's just kind of very humble, but he's very willing to talk about it. He wants history to be told, and he says he's going to tell it like it is, and he's not going to sugarcoat anything, but he wants the true history to be told. Is that right?
Correct.
He reported for duty, Lieutenant Fall, in January 6, 1943. He was shot down a year and a half later on June 10th, 1944. He got home. He was a prisoner of war, and he got home just under a year later on June 8th, 1945. 20 days later, he married his wife, Ethel May, right here beside him. I love that. They didn't waste any time. 20 days.
But we had known each other since the fourth and sixth grades in school.
Isn't that great? You're going to hear some more about their love story too, I promise. So, what did Lieutenant Fall do? He flew a P.W. Thunderbolt, and I have a picture of one. Of course, you can't see it very well, but you're gonna hear a whole lot more about it. This thing was a beast. 2,600 horsepower. 2,600 horsepower. Had a top speed of 430 miles an hour in 1943. That thing was a beast. And it weighed, when it was fully loaded with munitions, over 8 tons. 17,000 pounds, this thing, carried around in the air. This was a beast. Dr. Fall was shot down, as I said, in 1944, just past Omaha Beach, just beyond Omaha Beach, which you've all heard of. And 350 yards from the Canadian troops, but on the wrong side.
Yeah.
So close, so close. He was shot down and captured, and spent time in a P.O.W. camp, which you'll hear some more details about. For the pilots in the room, I thought this was an interesting fact. He signed up and joined the military in January of 1943, and 11 months later he was flying a P-47. He was assigned to a P-47 in 11 months. They got him trained quick and put him in the seat, didn't they? I thought that was very interesting. So that's kind of an overview of a real high-level overview. Now let's go talk about some details with Dr. Fall. And I thought I'd start first with, for the pilots in the room, with telling us about the flight characteristics and what it's like to fly a P-47, if you will. the power and what it's like to fly that airplane. With that 2,600 horsepower, I'm guessing you don't give it full power right off on takeoff, or you'd probably spin that thing around. But anyway, tell us about the flight characteristics.
I was sent after I was got my wings. I was sent to Florida for flying in a combat plane, and they sent me to this P-47 field. And you know, I had never seen a P-47. So when we got down there, we went out to the flight line right away to look things over, and I saw that big fat tubby thing sitting out there. I thought, my God, I'm a fighter pilot. That thing, I couldn't believe it. I was sick at heart, really. But we passed the cockpit test and took it out for a little ride, and it so happened that the takeoff was at the far end of the field. You flew back this way, so there was quite a taxiway down there. Well, we started up, and when I started out, I noticed there was a difference. There was not a lot of noise and rattle and shaking and motion in that cockpit. It was very solid, tight. And we started around the field, and boy, now listen, it was so sensitive and so easy to control. But you see, those wheels were set way out on the wings, and it was much easier to handle that thing. And I began to love that thing right away, man. By the time I got around the takeoff position, gave it the gun, and boy, I'm telling you, before I got clear in the air, I loved that plane. It was so much different than anything I'd ever flown. Everything was so easy, so quiet. It was a special plane. And later on, after I had a few hours in it, we took it out, and I realized it would do anything you ask it to do. And I was very, very proud of it, and very much of a hurry to take that thing into combat, because I knew it was the right one.
So the controls were real tight, sensitive, and
very sensitive, very easy. It's just the difference between getting in that Model A Ford and the Cadillac. Is that much difference?
Well, tell us about first of all a typical mission with a P-47 over there in France. Tell us what that was like. What was your day like?
At the time I was sent to England, there were two American Air Forces operating out of England, the 8th Air Force and the 9th Air Force. The 8th Air Force was primarily escort with the bombers, and the 9th Air Force was primarily ground work. Our three responsibilities in the 9th Air Force, one was, of course, to destroy the enemy Air Force, either in the air or on the ground, and then it was to stop the incoming supply of men and war materials to the front lines. And then we were on call from the people on the ground. If they had a strong point they couldn't handle, they'd ask one of us to come in and to put a few 1,000-pounders on them. And we were the ones that had a lot of fun after the Normandy started.
Well, probably the most memorable mission was that last one, the 21st mission that day. Why don't you walk us through that day, what you were doing, and then take us through what happened to the airplane and you on that last mission.
Well, it was a calm weekend. All of a sudden, we got this order to fly this mission. And as I remember, we took off about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were patrolling an area behind the invasion area and ran across some tanks on the ground. We went after them, and as I pulled up, my P-47 lurched to the right. I felt a thud, and of course I looked out over the left side, and there was a hole so big, all flared out, burning. Well, the P-47D, the gas tank, was designed in an L shape. You sat on it and leaned on it, and with that fire down there beside you that wasn't too far from the gas tank, and I knew I was going to have to get out of it. So I pulled up and got me a little altitude, and when that happened, all the anti-aircraft in that part of the country aimed in on me and gave me further damage. But I unhooked everything, got ready to bail out. The manual says to bail out of a P-47 is just unhook things and roll over on the back and unhook the belt and drop out. Very simple. And I got ready to do that. And by the time I got ready to roll, I looked out and there were several big holes in the wings. The right aileron was about 2/3 or 3/4 gone. It was hanging by the inside hinge. And the thing, I had to give it more and more and more throttle to keep in the air. So I got all ready and I started to make that roll. Well, with that aileron gone, you're not going to roll that thing. And I just slipped and lost precious altitude. I thought, well, that's not going to work. I tried once more, slipped. I knew that that wasn't going to happen. I was going to have to go out over the side. The book says if you go out over the side of a P-47, go out over the left side. Otherwise, the prop force will hold you up and the horizontal stabilizer will get you. Well, I'm not going to go out over that fire. So I prepared to go out over the left side. And that P-47 cockpit was big enough that I could stay crouched behind that windshield and get my feet up on the seats. Actually, I was squatting on the seat with my feet and tried to work over the side. Well, the prop force just pinned me back. I couldn't do it. So I cut the throttle, and with those holes in the wings, that thing just dropped. And I wasn't going to bail out with a drop of the plane, so I gave it the throttle again. Tried once more. I couldn't push my way out. It just wouldn't work. I knew I was going to die. And I didn't want to get burned to death. That was probably the worst of all. So I decided to put my foot on that stick and give it a hell of a kick. I was going to dive it into the ground and it'd be over quick. No burn. Well, to my amazement, after I kicked that stick, it threw me clear. I never touched any part of that airplane. It threw me clear. Now the authorities will tell you that won't work. The vertical stabilizer will get you, but it didn't get me. That's the only reason I'm here. And of course, after I felt I was in the air, and of course, when it tossed me out, the slipstream ripped the goggles off my face. I was temporarily blinded by the air, but after a few seconds, I could see again. And I had opened the chute, and out in front of me, I could see the channel with the invasion armada along the edge there. And I figured I had it made. I was going to go back home tonight. And about that time, I saw butterflies all around me. Those were tracers, machine gun fire. So I reached up and grabbed the right riser and slipped the chute so that I would drop faster. I misjudged and dropped it into the ground. When I hit the ground, I broke the fibula in the left leg just above the ankle. And I was partially conscious. I mean, I wasn't clear out, but from that force of hitting the ground, I was just not real clear. And the first thing I knew, here come a squad of young German soldiers. And they looked like kids. And I found out later that they were members of the 12th Hitlerjugend Panzer Division. They were 12, 14, 15 years old. And they disarmed me, of course, got me on my feet. And the squad leader pointed to a walk up around the edge of this house and said, walk. And I started complaining about my leg hurt. I couldn't walk. He poked me in the tummy with that burp gun and he says, walk or die. Well, I didn't die, did I? Went around the corner of that house. When I got around the corner of that house, now bear in mind, this is no man's land. You could hear gunfire from both ways. We're no man's land. I get around the corner of that house, and there on the sidewalk in front of the house was a group of children. I can't remember, I don't know, 4, 5, or 6, 7 children there. I don't know how many. But they were young children in no man's land. Well, the Germans were going to take me on down the lane, and I shook them off. I had 2 little sisters at home about the same age as some of these kids standing there in no man's land, and I felt so sorry for them. Well, a few days before the invasion started, they took our A2 jackets and sewed big canvas pockets on the inside of them, so you could carry escape material, mats, and that sort of thing with you. Well, hell, I knew I was never going to have anything like that, so I put important things like candy bars and chewing gum in those pockets. Well, I reached in the pockets and got that candy and chewing gum and laid it on the ground and pointed to it to the kids and went on. And that act helped me find exactly where I was shot down years later. And I corresponded with the family that was in that house. And all of those kids lived through there.
And there's pictures of that in his book, of the house and the stone wall that he landed just beside when he came in. He went back, and there's actually had an investigator, and they found exactly where he came down in the house and the family where he came down. Well, next I would like for you to tell them a little bit about remember, he's got a broken leg, okay? He's got a broken leg, and these young Germans are making him march. And tell us about the march, and maybe your buddy with the shoes, maybe that story. He didn't want to go on, you remember that?
Well, that's much later on. The broken leg, you see, the leg bone from the ankle to the knee, there's a double bone there. There's what they call the tibia and the fibula. The fibula is a small bone on the outside, and that's what was broken. The tibia would support a person as you walk, but you can imagine with the other bone being broken, every time you move the muscle in there, it got to you pretty soon. But it didn't make any difference. I had to walk on that from the time. You see, they didn't have a way there in the front lines to take a prisoner and hustle him back home. or back into Germany, back to prison camp. They had to pass him from one person to the other, was going that way, and it was a month before they got me back into the prison camp. And I had to walk everywhere I went. I had to walk all night. It was painful, but I could.
And they didn't treat it, right?
Oh no, no. Now that leg wasn't treated until after I got into the prison camp. At Stalag Luft 3, there was out in the Vorlager, there was a little building out there where they made sick call, and they had what they called a doctor. The doctor was a sophomore medical student when the war began, and he quit school and enlisted in the Air Corps. So he was one of us, but he was our doctor over there. The Red Cross got in a few incidentals for the sick room, but not a whole lot. Well, when they took me in there, every morning they would, every morning and every evening, the Germans would make you fall out for a PEL or a head count. And after the head count, why the American leader of the group would lead you in some calisthenics. Well, the next morning we were having those calisthenics, and of course on that leg, I wasn't doing a whole lot. And he got on me about it, and I said, that something happened when I bailed out. That leg hurts now. I did. He says, you make sick call. So when the sick call went out that morning, I went out on sick call to the little room, and the doctor, and he palpated and said, oh yeah, I said, sure, he says, it's broken. But he says, we don't have any x-rays, we can't x-ray it, we couldn't do anything with it if we did have x-rays. He says, the only thing I can do is to put that in a cast and hope it heals properly. And he put a cast on it. I wore it for 6 weeks. I've never had a bit of trouble with it since. But that was the treatment for my broken leg. Yeah.
Tell the folks a little bit about your interrogations. The first thing they want to do is interrogate you. They want to get information from you. And so the first march was after that he was interrogated. So tell us a little bit of what that was like.
They finally got me through France and over into the edge of Germany to their Dulag Luft, and that was the Luftwaffe's famous interrogation center. They thought they could get information out of anybody there. I was within a group maybe of a dozen people they ushered in there, but I was the first one into the interrogation room, and they took me into this room. There's a big mahogany desk and some of the highest ranking German officers you can imagine. Now, I didn't learn until many years later that those high ranking officers were GIs, but they were dressed up in order to impress the guy that they were interrogating. And this interrogation started, I gave him the name, rank, and serial number, and that was it. And he started again. Finally, he says, very well, we will give you time to think about this, and then we will bring you back. And if you do not cooperate, we will turn you over to the Gestapo, and they will shoot you. Guard, take him away. So they went and locked me in this little room. It was about 4 by 8, and the only thing in it was a bunk built out from one side. This bunk had a burlap bag filled with shavings. That was the only bedding you had in there. It was the only thing in the room. And after 7 days, 7 nights. Well, now wait a minute. Let's back up to the first morning. Of course, I'd had a broken leg. My leg was sore. I hadn't had a decent meal in about 3 weeks. And I was thirsty. I hadn't been able to notify my parents. Everything in my mind was a turmoil. And I slept very little that first night because the vermin in that palliasse were hungry and they kept me. Anyway, about 4 o'clock the next morning, as the sun started to come up, now I could tell when it was getting daylight because in one end of the room there was a little window, had translucent glass and bars on, but you could see light. You could tell whether it was daylight or dark out there when it started getting light. And every morning when it started getting light, I took my thumbnail and made a mark on the wall so I could keep track of the time that I was in there. The next morning I woke up and I was feeling real sorry for myself, hurting, hungry, thirsty, worried about my fiance and my family. All at once I felt a firm hand on my right shoulder. And then I heard this male voice. And this male voice says, you will be all right. You will get through this okay. It will not be easy, but you will get back to see your fiancé and your family again. And it was gone. That vision, ladies and gentlemen, helped me have the courage to go through the next few months and not worry too much because I knew that I would get back. Now, where was I when I went
Well,
down to D2?
I was going to ask you, you were talking about what happened the next time you went back to be interrogated.
Right. Okay. The next time I went back, it was the same thing. Name, rank, and serial number. Very well, we told you. The Gestapo, and they will shoot you. Guard, take him out. The guard took me outside of the building where there was a small barbed wire enclosure. I suppose maybe it was 15 feet across or something. And there was 3 or 4 other fellows in there too. And we didn't have the slightest idea what was going to happen to us, but we weren't too enthused. And we were there for, I suppose, maybe a couple of hours to think about things. And then we saw coming up the path out of the woods a squad of 5 or 6 Germans, all with burp guns, which was unusual.
What was a burp gun?
An little automatic machine gun that they could hold it with their hand. Usually the squad leader had one, but not the rest of it. Anyhow, they all had burp guns. They took us out of this enclosure and started down through the woods, and we figured that this was it. But if it was, so be it. But believe it or not, they took us to the train. They put us on the train, and then they took us to the prison camp.
What was it like on that train? Comfortable?
Oh, very comfortable on the train until we got into Berlin, and when the people there in the station learned that there were American prisoners there, they wanted to get in and kill us. After all, we had been bombing their place, and they had no use for us. But the train ride itself was uneventful.
And how many would you say was on one of those cars, packed in one of those cars?
Now, wait a minute. Which car are you talking about?
Well, I was talking when you moved camps.
You mean after the Russians got close and we moved out of Dulag?
Yes, yes.
Okay. It was only 29. It was from the first of the year in 1945. we could hear guns from the front lines, and it was the Russians moving in toward our permanent camp, our prison camp. And we figured that one of three things would happen. Either the Germans would try to move us out, or they'd just forget us and take off, or they would try to annihilate us. And we had plans for all three. But on the 29th day of January, 4 o'clock in the morning, they called us out. Blizzard conditions, believe it or not, blizzard conditions, temperature around 0 and heavy snow. And we started marching across Germany. Now, what was the question you asked me to?
I was just going to set them up to understand what the train car was like.
Yeah.
That trip.
Okay, they marched us. I believe it was 70-some miles. I don't remember for sure. And then they put us on a train to take us on down to Moosburg, Germany. They put us in boxcars. There were 40 and 8 boxcars, which meant their boxcars were set up to hold 40 men or 8 horses. Well, God only knows how many of us were in that boxcar, but there was not enough room in that boxcar for all of us to lay down at the same time. And the doors were locked.
And no restroom facilities, right?
The doors were locked from the outside. There was nothing, no food, no water, no facilities, nothing. And of course, some of the fellows got sick. Some of them got diarrhea. And you can imagine and we were in there a few days.
Can you tell us, I don't know where you're going to go with this because there's so many, but if I'm going to ask you what the most terrifying experience you had is, can you name one?
Why, being caught in that burning aircraft.
The burning aircraft, that would do it. I wasn't sure of that or in a P.O.W. cell confined with the vermin running all over you. You talked about that. Oh my goodness.
No, the terrifying bit would be caught in that burning aircraft.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Could you describe for the audience the day that the U.S. troops broke into camp and took it over?
Boy, you have to live it to appreciate it.
Probably impossible to fully describe the feelings.
We had word that they were close, and the night before we were liberated, the Germans came in and took the British and American commanding officers that were in with us, took them out to meet with the oncoming American troops. And they tried to arrange for a surrender. Well, the American troops were wanting no part of their deals. They were going to come in and take over and do what they wanted to do. Thank goodness. And those officers were brought back then. And of course we knew that the troops were there and that the next day they had planned to take us. And we could hear, the next day we could hear small gunfire. So we knew they had to be very close. And then all at once, we saw this old tank lumbering in toward us. And the tank come up with a barbed wire fence around our place, just mashed right over the old barbed wire and came in to visit.
Yeah, yeah, that barbed wire was no match for the American tanks, was it?
No.
Yeah. And when the Americans came in, what was one of the first things they did?
They
Remember
didn't
the
do
flagpole?
they didn't do it.
Oh.
The Kriegies did. Somebody came up with a nice American flag, and that damn swastika was ripped down, and that beautiful stars and stripes were hung up.
Do you hear
And
that? Beautiful stars and stripes was hung up. Can you imagine? Well, I'm pretty confident no one here has met General Patton, except for this guy here. Can you tell us what it was like when he came into camp? What was he like?
Patton was a very brusque individual. He said that he knew food was an item, and his kitchens were moving into the camp immediately and going to work 24 hours a day.
He made sure you guys got something to eat.
Yeah.
He came and spoke to the troops, didn't he? The POWs.
No. He was in. His old Jeep drove in, and he visited a while with the people.
Mm-hmm.
But so far as a planned encounter, no.
Okay. Well, we're going to open up for some questions here in a moment, but first, I want you to tell about when you got back to the United States, and what was the first thing you did? You took that, you got a bus ticket somewhere.
Well, we came into New York. We were out at Fort Hamilton a couple of days until they got our records straightened up. And then we were given a 60-day convalescent leave. And of course, as soon as we were liberated, and I got to a phone, I called my parents, learned that they were all right, and I asked about Ethel May, and she had a beauty shop she operated over in Peru. And they didn't have the phone number for that. So I sent Mama an email telling her when I would be back.
An email, honey.
Not an email, but a mail, a telegram.
Telegram. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Anyway, told her when I'd be back. And took the train, of course, in Indianapolis, and then picked up the bus for Peru. And you know, Mom and I had been engaged before I went over. And of course, all the 10.5 months I had not the first word from home. I didn't know if my parents were all right. I didn't know if Mama was all right. I didn't know if she'd gone and got married. I mean, who knows?
We wrote and we sent packages, but they
Never got it.
did not get them.
Sure.
We I got to Peru on the bus, and the bus station was just 2 or 3 blocks from her shop. So I just walked up and got up there and turned around that corner. There was her shop across the street, Swank Beauty Shop. And as I stood there, that door opened and Mama came out.
She came out.
We saw each other. We met in the middle of the street,
Main Street.
and there's no doubt the old flame was still there.
That's beautiful.
20 days later, we made it legal.
And 20 days later, they were married.
How old Dr. Paul is, how old he was when he flew the airplane, and how long they've been married.
Yes, you just celebrated your 76th wedding anniversary,
Right.
didn't you? That's right.
76 years on
Just-
June 28th.
June 28th, yes. And how old are you? How old are you?
How old am I? I'm past 19.
I know how old you are, but
I'm 98 and counting.
98 and counting. Pretty sharp mind, wouldn't you say? And the guy can survive a POW camp, and he can survive COVID. He had COVID last year. He got COVID and beat that. Can you imagine? He was
Well, he
20
saved-
years old when you went in, correct?
The Lord saved me for this meeting.
Yeah, there you go. He said, yeah, did you hear that? He thinks God saved him just for this meeting. So, and you were 20 when you went into the service, is that correct?
I went in and, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, we still have a few minutes. We can ask some questions if you've got some questions. I want to get him a bottle of water. So would you mind taking this for questions? I'm going to run and get him a glass of water.
Dr. Paul, I wanted to ask you, before you were shot down, when you were flying and you perhaps took out a bridge or whatever your target was, can you describe the feeling that you had when you were successful on a mission?
Well, there was no feeling of exhilaration or anything like that. It's just that, well, I got the job done.
What was it like for you when you saw Dr. Fall come home? And this was right in the middle of Peru, Indiana, in the middle of Main Street. Is that right?
Right.
Evidently, if there was traffic, they stopped, obviously. They
Some
probably
water.
saw,
Some
I'm
water.
sure,
Thank you.
that there was this young lieutenant, and he was just home from the war. And so they just let us hug each other in the middle of Main Street and stopped. And so
There was a question over here.
Okay. Just one thing. Did you have any word that whole time that you were in the POW camp? Did you have any knowledge of his welfare back and forth at all? None.
we did not hear from him, and I'd go over to his parents on weekends, and we would put together nice packages for him that would have little snacks. One of the neighbor ladies knit him a lovely sweater, and he didn't ever get it. And so all the packages we put together were in vain because he never got them, nor mail, he did not. But we didn't know that. We didn't know that till he got home, that he didn't receive any of the things that we sent him.
My question is for Dr. Fall, right? Dr. Fall. What was it that drew you to flying in the first place when you were 19, 20 years old back then? How did you know you wanted to fly? How did you get started in that? And the second part is, did you continue flying at some point after coming back?
I know the answer to both of those questions, but I'm going to let you answer. What got you started? You remember that time?
Yes, yeah, I'll tell you. When I was a little kid, probably 6, 7, 8 years old, whenever I heard an airplane, which was not very often then, I just ran out and watched that thing as long as I could see, but really interested in it. Well, one day when I was probably, I don't know, 9, 10 years old, we were visiting my grandparents up on the southeast side of Fulton, Indiana. And there was a biplane came in from the north and landed just on the other side of town.
In the field.
Yeah, in
True barnstorm.
Yeah, and it kept coming up and landing again. And in a little while, one of my school chums that lived close came running up and he says, "Hey, Fall," he says, "this plane is out here in Atchison's pasture field and they're taking up rides for $1. Let's go out and take a ride." Well, I bummed $1 off of Dad and we ran clear out to the pasture field. And the fellow, he took us a ride. He put us both in. It was I think it was a Stearman. I'm not too sure. It was an old biplane, 2 cockpits. He strapped us in the front cockpit, one on top of the other. And he just discharged us $1 because we were so small. But anyhow, that flight in that airplane did it for me. I thought that was the most wonderful feeling, the most wonderful way to be. Well, it's just where it puts you. You can't describe it, but it was wonderful. It was a nagging thing. I wanted, from that time on, I had yearned to fly. And now I'm going to be perfectly honest about it. When the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, I wanted to help my country, and I knew that I was going to enlist. But if I enlisted in the Air Corps, maybe I could help my country and learn to fly at the same time. And that was one of the driving forces that put me through, because I loved to fly. I loved the air, but I owed my country my support.
And the second part of that question is, when you got back to the United States, did you continue your flying?
I took a few flights because my son wanted to go up a couple of times, but, well, back up a little bit. Before I was shot down, I was a confirmed Army man. I would never do anything except fly in the Air Corps. That was it. Nothing else. 10.5 months later, I had some time to think about it. And I had to think about her. And maybe a family, what would I do with them? And then there's the fact that that thing burned out from under you. I didn't love it just quite as much as I did before. So, considering everything, that's why I got out.
You didn't continue.
Yeah.
I understand. Another question? Maybe one more? Yeah.
Were you involved in any aerial combat?
Well, yes and no. On my first mission, my first mission was an escort, one of the few we flew, and we had to take the bombers a certain distance, and then our gas was so we had to turn back. Well, the 51s were supposed to pick up the bombers there, and they weren't there, but we turned back anyway. Well, about that time, the bombers screamed they were getting hit. We turned back again, and as we turned back, we turned into the F-90s that were coming down, and my flight was here and going up, but my flight, the guy I was flying on, we couldn't pull it up enough to get a shot at him, and about that quick they were gone. That was my all of my aerial, because, as I say, we were ground support, railroad tracks and bridges and all that sort of thing.
One more, and right here.
So, did you only have one P-47? Like, you just only flew the same plane? And when it got shot down, was it kind of heartbreaking to watch it be burned alive and crash?
Oh, this is a good question. He's going to like to answer this.
I was in the first group of replacements that came into to our squadron. It was a new squadron, hadn't been over there very long, and I was one of the first replacements. Well, there was a colonel in our squadron that had a beautiful airplane called Diablo. It had a big picture of the devil with a spear and a German soldier holding him over a German fire, or German fire. Well, this colonel was transferred out. Diablo was assigned to me. So Diablo was my plane. However, on one of the first missions on D-Day, they had a new guy fly one of the missions in Diablo. And they were sent over to take out these gun emplacements that are in the hillsides that were shelling the Armada coming in. This young man had got his target because he flew Diablo and two 1,000 bombs directly into that gun position. That's what happened to Diablo. And from then on out, I had to fly somebody. But it wasn't. It was only that was the first day of the invasion. 4 days later, I was shot down, and then no big deal. But it so happened that I flew Whitaker's plane once, and came back with a bunch of damage. Something blew up in front of me, and there was a bunch of damage on it. That was one of Whitaker's plane. Well, Whitaker got a replacement. I was flying Whitaker's plane today. I was shot down.
Oh, so that was his plane.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, help me just thank Dr. Fall for coming this morning. And the love of his life sitting right next to him, Ethel May, thanks for coming. It was a delight to hear your love story. I love hearing that. Every time, I just love hearing that. Right in the middle of Main Street. That's beautiful.
I want to say it's been a real pleasure to be here with you people who are air-minded. It's a wonderful thing. And I envy you young folks here. You've got a wonderful life ahead of you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming, everybody. And if you want to come up and meet him, he said he would be willing to do that. Say hi to a couple of you. See the pictures? Yes. Why don't we do that? Let's do that. We'll shut the lights off so we can see the pictures a little bit better. That's a great idea. Oh, there you go. This is yours.
Oh, I'm finished.
You're
with the
done?
thing, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll just start off here from the beginning again. His career from when he first enlisted to through flight school. This is the P-47. This is his group. Lieutenant Fall is here on the end, right here. Kind of gives you an idea of the size of the airplane. You can see the gentleman standing up, and they're not even sure they're halfway up the side of that thing. It's pretty big, as he said, fat thing. And when he first saw it, it did look like this thing would be very fast. There's Diablo. he was telling me about, the colonel's plane that went to him. The P-47's last mission. Oops, I accidentally hit in. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. And then some pictures of P.O.W. camps so that you can get an idea of what those were like. Let's see, you told me, I don't know, am I remembering like 48,000 people in one of these camps? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 48,000 people, and middle of the winter, very, very cold days. I did it again. As you can see,
they made a march once across. They marched in 0 weather. How far, Jim? But
I can't remember exactly, around 70 miles.
marched in these conditions.
Yes.
And food was a very rarity. The Red Cross is the one that provided the food. Soup wagon. So they got soup, but not a lot of nourishment.
I lost just half my body weight in 10.5 months.
Say that again?
I lost just half my body weight in 10.5 months.
Half his body weight. Wow. And he is very decorated. Those are his medals. So. Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Wait, could I say just one more
yes,
thing?
You sure can. I'm going to turn the light on.
You talk about decorated and that sort of thing, but you know, a true soldier is not fighting because he hates the enemy in front of him. He's fighting because of what he left behind.
Amen.
So that's the big thing. We were fighting because we wanted to keep our great country and our wonderful people.